Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steven Jackson. I'm recording this video from my barracks room here at Joint Base Lewis McChord here in Washington State, and I'd like to offer my opinions on Dune Part 2, which I actually saw last night. I've actually seen it twice. I saw it on Thursday night, and then I saw it last night. Um, Kind of a funny story. First time I saw it on Thursday, for some incredible reason, I was the only person in the theater because the theater I went to had one of those special auditoriums where it's like everything's enhanced, the visuals, the sound. So everyone flocked to that theater, and I was sitting in the regular theater. So I had center seat in the auditorium, nobody else. So it was kind of a weird experience, but the movie was still great. So there was that. And the second time, I was at another theater and I got to see it in an entirely full theater, which was awesome because I got to, share it with people who actually knew the source material. So after the movie, we were able to engage in discussions about the different variations and what had happened. Compared to the books and some of the previous adaptations. So, yeah. So, seen it twice. First time, empty theater. Second time, packed theater. Both times, fantastic movie. So, one of the things I love about Dune is that Dune was one of the first big books I ever read as a kid. It's I grew up reading like The Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. So I grew up with lots of dense, heavy books. So I remember, the first time I ever read Dune, on the surface, it's kind of one of those kind of cliched stories, a boy of privilege and noble rank. He is the last survivor of family tragedy, orchestrated by his numerous enemies. He learns the ways of a new culture and harnesses their power to exact revenge against those who wronged him. And then on subsequent readings, you start to see the different layers of the story and also learn kind of the subtext behind, the hero's journey and how Frank Herbert perceived it as being kind of a stupid idea. Because, the phrase never meet your heroes. Or even more recently, Harvey Dent's line from The Dark Knight, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, which is exactly what happens to Paul Moeidi Atreides throughout the continuing Dune saga. In the first book, he starts out as the hero. He's the one trying to bring justice to those who killed his father and destroyed his family. And then by the time Dune Messiah comes around, you start beginning to wonder, is he really the good guy anymore? And we definitely get lots of that in Dune Part 2. I suppose one of the things that a lot of people talk about how Dune is that Dune is one of those properties that was considered for the longest time impossible to adapt. And I think the problem is, and one of those things that happened with the David Lynch version in 1984 was the fact that you're trying to cram so much information into so short a time period. Um, so there are going to be lots of things where it feels like you're going to have to rush through them. So of course that's why you have stuff like monologuing and montages to help kind of condense whole sections of material into a shorter span of time, so then you can get to the rest of the story continuing. Which is why I've always found that the sci-fi miniseries is the first one, and then Children of Doom did a better job of this because they had more time to kind of flesh out some of the details. But at the same time, these books were written in the 1960s and 70s. So there's definitely lots of 60s and 70s mentality behind some of the characters and in lots of the writing that Frank Herbert did. So there's a lot of stuff that could possibly be removed from adaptations of the books because honestly, ladies and gentlemen, it's impossible. You cannot do a one-to-one adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune to the big screen. It's impossible. I know it's heartbreaking, but it's the truth. So what Denis Villeneuve does with Dune Part 1 and 2 is he does cut out a lot of what might be considered kind of the fat of the story and makes it leaner and more straightforward. He doesn't take out like all of the major details, but he does get rid of stuff that would kind of drag down the story. So in that regard, I salute him because he made Dune while it's still kind of confusing and there are some parts where you're kind of wondering like what's going on, who's involved, why are these characters relevant, but it does make it better in terms of narrative understanding. You do have a clearer sense of who the players are and what motivates them. Um, so in part two, I I found it incredible how they developed the whole process by which Paul Atreides goes from being kind of this young, um, somewhat naive, idealistic young man who's trying to um, protect his family and destroy his enemies to reluctantly becoming this messianic figure to this entire culture. And I say reluctantly because, throughout the movie, you see that he has these visions of destruction and death, and he's terrified of it. He's terrified of the idea that if somehow that he will be responsible for these horrors. And you got to remember in the first movie, he was talking about the first visions he was having, Atreides legions worshiping at the shrine of his father's skull. And the probably one of his best lines, a war in my name. I mean, could you imagine anything more terrifying than that? I mean, having an entire war being fought in your name. And so he just wants so desperately to not be that. He does not want to be the Lisan al Gaib, the voice of the outer world. And yet, at the same time, there are so many factors that are forcing him towards that. One of which is Stilgar, the Naib of Sietch Tabra, who is who's one of the hardcore believers. One of the things I actually liked that they did is that they separated groups of Fremen. So you have all the Fremen that live in the north who are kind of skeptical about the whole prophecy about the Mahdi and the coming of the Lisan al Gaib and all that. And then you have the southerners who are the fundamentalists, who are the hardcore believers, of whom Stilgar is one of them. Meanwhile, Chani and her friends, they're the Northerners, so they're all kind of like, come on, man, this prophecy stuff is a load of crap. It's Bene Gesserit propaganda. They've been spoon feeding us this garbage for centuries. And you actually believe this? She even says, Chani, she says, is like, we don't believe in this stuff. We believe in ourselves. We believe in the Fremen. That's what we believe in. And that I feel like was a great change from the books because the books, Chani is a devoted follower of Paul as Moadib. She's very subservient. She's very willing. She's basically just kind of a hanger on. I mean, the love between them is a genuine love, but it does seem like at times she's just kind of hanging on to him, kind of devoted to him to an almost absurd degree. Whereas in this one, it's kind of nice to see the contrast. Is that there's somebody out there who's just like, I don't like what they're trying to make you. I don't like the person they want you to be. I love you as you are, not as what they want. That I think was kind of cool. So, okay, so back to like the people who wanted to foster the legend. So you got Stilgar, who is a devoted follower who basically believes that Paul is the Messiah, even when he will vehemently say, "No, I'm not the Messiah." Uh, and he'll go, of course, Stilgar will go, "Oh, but of course he's too humble to admit he's the Messiah, which is all the more reason he is the Messiah." And at this point, I'm just waiting for the Monty Python group to just come in and like go, "He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy." Just it was one of the that thought kept going through my mind to the entire movie. It was so stupid, but it was just like, yeah, kind of. Anyway, and but the probably the more extreme version of that is Lady Jessica because she views that getting the entire population to believe in her son as this messianic figure is probably the best way to keep him safe. But she does it in a way that kind of turns her into something of a villain because she does it in such an insidious way, a very Benny Gesserit way. She works behind the scenes. She uses her voice to compel the weaker minds to follow her and to follow Paul. And this is, of course, helped by the fact that she becomes a Reverend Mother. So, that's one of the scenes that really kind of stood out for me. And also one of the things that always really annoyed me about the books and the movies and the miniseries is that the fact that everyone's like, "Oh, Jessica, you must become a Reverend Mother and you must drink the water of life," blah, blah, blah. At no point does she ever say, um, "I'm pregnant. How will this affect my unborn child?" I just feel like all she has to do is ask that question, and then everyone will kind of hit the brakes and kind of go, "Oh, uh, that's never happened before. We have no idea. For all we don't know what's going to happen. You drink the water of life, it could kill your baby, it could mutate your baby, something could happen. We don't know what." It feels like all she has to do is just say, "Reverend Mother, I'm currently expecting. How will this affect me? And more importantly, how will it affect my baby?" Just seriously, one question. One question. And yet she never asks it. Not once in the entirety of the book or any of the adaptations. Never asks that question. And that always kind of bugs me. It's just like, you're going to be a mom. You want to know I'm putting this unknown substance into my body, which will then be introduced to my baby through the umbilical cord. How is this going to affect us both? More importantly, how is it going to affect her? That always bugged me. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I feel like if I have a wife or a girlfriend and they're expecting and they have to take some sort of chemicals or medicine for something, I think we'd both like to know, is this going to have an adverse reaction for the baby? Just a thought. It's just kind of a minor deviation, but After she takes the water of life and transforms into a Reverend Mother, and then Alia, her daughter, if you've read the books, her name is Alia. Actually, she gets a pretty cool title in the books, Saint Alia of the Knife. Very cool. I mean, she kind of has a bit of a psychotic breakdown later on in the books, but that's much, much later on. And the point is, she's awakened to consciousness while she's still in the womb. So she and her mom start having actual conversations. She's still in the womb and she's having full fledged conversations with her mother, which is pretty cool. A little creepy, but cool. But they do start talking about how, like, we've got to foster the belief in the Lisan al Gaib. We've got to get the religious ball rolling. And it's like, whoa, it's crazy. And not to mention, she starts changing. She kind of throws herself into the Reverend Mother role. She gets lots of face tattoos, fancy outfits. So she starts changing. And then there are a couple of times she actually uses the voice, and it's creepy as hell. Especially when she starts using like the other memory voices. Because when you're a Reverend Mother, you take on the memories and the consciousnesses of all the Reverend Mothers that came before you. So you're basically a vessel for every Reverend Mother that came before you. So that's a lot of voices in your head. So one of the things that makes Reverend Mothers so special is the fact that they're able to kind of sort out the voices and keep the other consciousnesses from overtaking her consciousness, which of course requires years of discipline, training, and lots of stuff like that. And if you've read the books, that's for Alia, that's one of the big tragedies is that, being awakened to consciousness before you're even born, you haven't developed the skill to deal with that kind of just constant mental pressure from so many voices of so many Reverend Mothers just constantly in your head, all talking, most likely at the same time. And you're a baby having to deal with all of that. You haven't even learned how to wipe your own ass yet, and you're still having to deal with that. It's nuts. And it doesn't end well for her. But that's again far, far off in the books. So you've got that. You've got this whole the religious aspect that Paul is trying so desperately to stay away from. And over time, circumstances force him to kind of accept and embrace the role. And it's kind of heartbreaking to see. He's trying so hard to be like, no, this is not who I am. This is not who I want to be. I want to be Paul Atreides. I want to be Moadib. I want to be a Fremen. I want to ride worms. I want to fight the Harkonnen. I want to be with Chani. I want this life. I'm happy here. Even there's a scene where he's sitting on the dune and he's looking out in the desert, and he says, Father, I found my way. I'm happy. He even takes off the ring and puts it in his pocket, and it's just like, wow, he's happy here. And then just circumstances just spiral out of control, and it's just ugh. It's hard. So there's that. Um, Another thing that I like how they did was bringing back was how they brought back Gurney. In my opinion, the scene where Gurney Halleck and Paul reunite is always one of my favorite scenes in the book, in the adaptations. First time I remember it getting emotional about it was in the 1984 version because Gurney Halleck is played by Patrick Stewart, one of my favorite actors of all time. So that scene where he and Paul, Kyle MacLachlan, they reunite during the attack on the smugglers, and he's just like, they said you were dead. And then he holds up the ring and he's just like, and then he just walks over and they just hug. And it's just like, Gurney, man. And he's like, you young pup, you young pup. And it's just like, you can just, for me, that's just one of the great scenes because it shows how much these two men love each other. Because both of them thought the other was dead. Paul lost everyone in that one night. Oh, and over the next couple of days, he lost his dad, he lost Thufir, he lost most of his followers, his father's men, and then he loses Duncan. So he's lost like the majority of the family figures in his life. Duncan, Thufir, and Gurney were kind of like the cool uncles of the family. They were his teachers, they were his friends, they were kind of like his extended family. Like Thufir and Gurney were kind of like his cool grandfathers. Duncan was kind of like the cool uncle. So they were as much Atreides as his father was. So when he loses them, all he has left is his mother. So he's kind of a little bit adrift because he doesn't have anyone else. And Gurney is kind of the same way. He loses his Duke, loses Paul, he loses Duncan, he loses Thufir. He loses all the men he trained and fought with. And all he has left is being a smuggler and kind of just waiting to die. He's not really living, he's just kind of existing. And then he finally finds Paul again, and it's like the spark of life just comes back to him. Like, I have purpose again. I have a reason to live. And it's not just revenge. It's him. He is my purpose. He is my reason for being. And in fact, I remember from the 2003 miniseries, there was that scene where he and Paul are talking, and Paul says, "Enlist with me and help us take back Arrakis from the Harkonnen." And and Gurney goes, "Enlist? I never left." And like, damn it, man. That is hardcore loyalty. That is fucking hardcore Atreides. Ride or die, bitches. And I was like, yeah, that's why he's one of my favorite characters, because he is in for the long haul. So good for him. So, and then we'll come to the other characters, like House Harkonnen. House Harkonnen, actually, I keep trying to remember, is it Harkonnen or Harkonnen? I keep hearing variations, but I think it's Harkonnen. So I apologize if I mispronounce it. But House Harkonnen, they do definitely a good job at showing, the frustrations and the problems of the characters. You've got Raban, who's the new planetary governor, and he is just fighting this losing battle. He's trying to pacify this planet, and it's not cooperating with him. There's that one scene in the beginning where, after the Harkonnen patrol is destroyed, and he's just like, your orders were to control the entire planet. And he's like, we are. And like, half the planet is not under our control. We're losing our to fucking rats. And then, he clearly looks like he's exhausted. Like he hasn't slept in days. Because he's just constantly dealing with all of these problems. And then his aide says, like, sir, you might want to get some rest. You look tired. And he just fucking snaps. Just chops him in the throat, bashes his head, just screaming at everybody. And nothing works. Like, one of the best scenes is that a spice depot gets blown up, and he just like, you know what? Fuck it. Pull out all the stops. We're calling all the troops. We're going after him. And they go after him, and they get massacred. And he sees Paul walking out of the smoke, out of the dust. And not even running. He's just walking. He's doing like that Jason Voorhees walking. Like, he's got all the time in the world. He doesn't have to rush. You can run your ass off and wear yourself out. He's just going to keep walking, keeping a steady pace, because he's going to catch your ass and he's going to kill you. And Raban, he starts out being all cocky, like, my team, come out and face me. And one by one, all his guys just start dropping it. Bam, 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 bam. And the next thing you know, he's just walking out and like, here I am. You want to go? And he's like, no, run away. Does. Even the coolest thing, one of the Fremen actually jumps up on the Thopter trying to kill him. So he is hanging on for dear life. He is scared. He's terrified. And it's amazing to see, in the first movie, he looks so intimidating, badass when he's killing the Atreides prisoners. And now he's just like, I'm in deep shit. And then we cut to Gidi Prime, where we see his younger brother, Fade Ralph Harkonnen. 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 Hey, damn it, I keep messing that one up. But it's so cool to see just the contrast. You've got the loud and brute strength of Raban, and then you've got, he's smaller, he's skinnier, but doesn't make him any less dangerous. He's getting ready for his fight, and he's given these two new blades, and he's just kind of like in and out. And the guy who's holding him, he's sweating because he's afraid, like he's gonna kill him just to try the blades out. And the next thing you know, he just kills two servant girls, and just casually goes, "It's like blade could be sharper." I was like, this guy is unhinged. And then, it then cuts to him in this gladiatorial arena where he's fighting against these three Atreides survivors. Two of whom are drugged, so of course, an easy contest. I mean, he's wearing a body shield, so he's like, I got nothing to worry about. This is a workout for me. But then the last guy, and this is one of the cool things that I loved, was the fact that he was one of the Atreides officers. Now, I seem to remember that he was actually I think one of the stunt coordinators who got a speaking role in the movie. And he was good. I mean, in the end, he got killed, but he was the only guy who actually managed to put up a fight with Fade. And Fade, he's loving it. He loves the fact he has to take off his shield. He's actually getting into a fight with this guy. It's getting physical. Like the blade is literally inches from his face. And all these guys who are hanging around who are like, to make sure that he's not in any danger. They got these hooks. So it's like, if one of the opponents gets too close, they can just hook and pull him back. And he's screaming at them to get back. Where it's just like, you mess this up for me, I will fucking skin you alive. And I was like, you can respect that. It's like, yeah, he's a psychotic piece of shit, but he also likes a fair fight. He likes the honor of actual, like, combat, which I think was cool. So, okay, yeah, I mean, he's Harkonnen, so it's like you're supposed to hate him. But at the same time, you're like, okay, not bad, well done. Uh, so yeah, it's just the way that they make us kind of like the characters, even when we're supposed to hate them. It's amazing to see how they make these characters seem so real and believable and likable and hateable at the same time. It's incredible to watch. Like Denis Villeneuve just really gives them a lot of like humanity, even when they're being inhumane, which I always thought was kind of a problem with the 1984 version. It's like they take the cruelty of the Harkonnens, the bad guy thing, and they just cranked it up way too high. They just made Vladimir Harkonnen way too psychotic. They made Raban way too just kind of like a one-track mind beast. And they made Fade kind of like a psychotic playboy. Whereas in this one, you know, Raban is still brutal, but he's also kind of human. He's scared. Like scared of Muad'Dib. He's scared of his uncle. He's scared of failure. And he's in some way he's even scared of his brother. One scene in particular is like this is after Fade is made the new planetary governor of Arrakis, and Raban's just like, "What the hell are you doing here?" I'm like, I got a new job. Yours. Feel free to kiss my feet, brother." And Raban's like, "I'm gonna up," and Fade just drops him, barely even breaks a sweat, and he's just holding him down, just like, "You've humiliated our family long enough. So either you kiss my feet or I paint the floor with your blood. Your choice." And I was just like, dude, bravo. So yeah. Um so yeah, just I love how they make the characters, how they just make everything feel like real in a way. And then there are some of the side characters, like they actually introduced Lady Margot Fenring, who is a prominent character in the books, along with her husband, who doesn't show up for obvious reasons. If he wasn't, I guess Denis Villeneuve thought it's like that's just one storyline, that's one too many. So, but Margot Fenring does play an important role in the books, and she does play an important role in the movie. She's sent by the Bene Gesserit to kind of judge Fade as a potential conduit for their breeding program for the Kwisatz Haderach. Um, so that was kind of a cool little divergence. And then you've got characters like Princess Irulan, who's narrating a journal that she's writing about how everything going on with the fall of House Atreides, her father's reactions to it, and kind of showing how politically astute she is, and also bringing up the questions of like, what if Paul Atreides is still alive? Do he and Muad'Dib have something in common? Are they the same person? Who knows? And then you've got Shaddam the Fourth, who is played wonderfully by Christopher Walken. Uh, kind of trying to figure out his own plays, and dealing with the fact that he literally condemned his cousin. In the books, Leto Atreides is actually related to Shaddam the Fourth by blood, which in some ways makes him a potential candidate to succeed Shaddam the Fourth, since Shaddam had no sons to carry on the bloodline. Um, but of course, in the movie, there is the line, "You'll make a formidable empress," to Irulan when they're talking about Muad'Dib, and it's like, how do we deal with him? Do we use brute force? Do we send assassins? And Irulan just brings up all these counterpoints. It's like, you abuse brute force, it only strengthens their position. You send assassins, the religious fervor would only carry on after they're dead, to use another science fiction author's work, Isaac Asimov's Foundations. It's like, you know, we kill the man, but what about the martyr? What about the message? Martyrs tend to have a long half-life. So that's kind of a cool thing. It's just the idea that, why don't we just let this war unfold? Why don't we let the Fremen and the Harkonnen beat the crap out of each other? Spice production gets disrupted. The Emperor comes in with a Sardaukar, saves the day, and everyone loves him. It's a win-win. We get spice production back. Emperor looks like the good guy. Everyone goes home happy. Uh, so yeah. So it's just like everything is just executed so well. I mean, there is a criticism. It's that it's like there's so much that we only kind of get the surface layer of. I mean, everyone keeps saying one of the big criticisms of this movie is that it's too short. And honestly, that's probably one of the best criticisms you can give, is that people want more. So there's definitely a lot of ground to cover on this. Um, and then of course we get to the last few scenes where the Fremen have all assembled, and Paul has finally taken the water of life. Actually, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because after Fade takes over, a whole series of events happens where he starts using these brutal, direct measures to deal with all the Fremen in the north. He starts using artillery, literally blowing up every siege he can find. Like everything. Just, don't do anything fancy. Just be direct. Hit them hard, hit them fast, wear them down, and then move in and mop up the survivors. And that's what happens. It's like every siege gets hit, so they all have to evacuate and move to the southern regions, which are considered by everyone uninhabitable because there's this giant storm wall that separates them at the equator. So, and then, they go off, and then Paul has to go off, and he needs to take the water of life to unlock his full potential as the Kwisatz Haderach. And then he does that. And then he finds out that he's descended from House Harkonnen through the paternal line. His grandfather is Vladimir Harkonnen. So his grandfather conspired to kill his father and his son-in-law and his own grandson. So it's kind of, well, I mean, not son-in-law. Leto and Jessica were not married. Jessica was his concubine. The point is, it's just, once again, another series of family dynastic squabbles that is just, honestly, you try to understand the entire family tree of Dune, it is crazy. It's crazy. And that's something to be covered in greater detail at a later time. But the point is that he now sees the future and the past with greater clarity than ever before. So he knows now what he has to do, and he knows how to do it, and it's by becoming the very thing that he did not want to be. So he goes to there's this war council in the south where all the tribal leaders come together, and he basically declares himself the Duke of Arrakis. He declares himself the Lisan al Gaib, and finally unites all the Fremen into a single force. And he plans this attack. He executes it. He uses his family's atomic stockpile to destroy a portion of the shield wall, allowing a sandstorm to come through, which then is followed by an entire army on sandworms, which is probably one of the most incredible scenes in the entire movie. Because you've got the entire Imperial army standing ready, swords drawn, they're all ready to do their thing. The next thing you know, you see these giant worms just jumping out of this dust hole. And they're all just like, nope, we're running. And it's amazing. Like the whole sequence is just visual spectacle like none other. Like it's right up there with one of those the battles from Lord of the Rings. Just this visual feast, auditory, visual, and it's just like you're seeing and hearing just this cacophony of sounds that all just come together, and it's perfect. It's absolutely visually and audibly perfect. And and I loved it. I love the fact that we got to see this after waiting for so long. And also it's just the scenes with Paul finally encountering his grandfather and just effortlessly dispatching him. That for me was just amazing. You seeing him lying on the floor, just this fat blob, and his grandson's just looking over him and just says, "Grandfather?" And just you see that moment of realization in his eyes where he's just like, "Oh, fuck." And then just boom, knife in the neck. And then he says, "You die like an animal." And I was like, "Oh, god damn." That was just beautiful. I think if there was one thing that I did find kind of disappointing was kind of the interaction between Gurney Halleck and Raban and the Battle of Arrakeen. Because the Battle of Arrakeen was actually pretty cool to watch because you see the whole city in flames. You see Harkonnen gunships just opening fire, but it's impossible to stop him. The Atreides and the Fremen legions are just pouring through nonstop, and they're just obliterating the Harkonnen. Just and Gurney's just 1 2 bam, 1 2 bam, 1 2 bam, just effortlessly cutting down Harkonnen soldiers. And then he and the Fremen are coming up these stairs, and he's just like, "Rip it!" And Raban turns around and he sees him, and Raban's being all cocky, like, "Look who's back from the dead!" And he pulls out the ink vine whip that he used to scar Gurney with. And I think if there's one thing that I wish they had done was make the fight just a little longer. Just kind of prolong Raban's suffering just a little bit. Just to have him like cut him in a few places and just cripple him. And then finally Gurney would deliver the coup de grace and just finish him off. But I feel like maybe, it was kind of a cool way to show just how much of a superior fighter Gurney is. And I guess how much he hated him that he didn't want to waste time. He didn't want to savor the moment. He just wanted him dead. No theatrics, no grand speeches. He just just one stab and then he says for my duke and my friends and just pulls the knife out, drops him, and it's like and then it's like he forgets him. It's like, I have focused my attention on you for as long as I wanted to. Now that you're dead, you no longer exist. You are a non-entity. It's like it reminds me of the line from Rob Roy by Mary McGregor when after she's assaulted by Archibald Cunningham. I will think you dead until my husband makes you so, and then I will think of you no more. That's how I feel like with Gurney Halleck. It's just like I've wanted you dead my entire life, and now that you are, I am not going to waste any more time thinking about you. So I feel like that. I mean, did I want to see more of a fight scene between the two? Yes, but in a way, I do like how they ended it quickly, efficiently, and then it's just okay, on to the next thing. Uh then jumping ahead, you've got the other great houses showing up, and so Paul says, inform them that if they try to attack this world, I will detonate my atomics over the spice fields and I will obliterate them. Then he kind of forces the emperor to recognize his authority um, by saying, you're going to be lucky you keep your head after all this. However, I will take your daughter as my wife to ensure the successful transition of power. You surrender the throne, she gets it, she marries me, I become emperor, and that's the best deal you're gonna get. But then, of course, Fade, the last surviving Harkonnen, steps up as the Imperial champion, and the two of them have this amazing knife fight. Apparently, they trained Austin Butler, who plays Thade, and Timothy Chalamet. They trained separately on the fight scenes, and then they came together and they trained together, and it shows. Just every move is just perfectly executed. It reminds me of the lightsaber duel from Episode 3 from Star Wars, where Anakin and Obi-Wan are just going through, and the moves are just there's no everything is precise and clean, and there's nothing that suggests any sense of sloppiness. Like you get the sense that these two guys have been training their entire lives on how to use knives. They have trained their entire lives on how to fight properly, and now they're going to pull out all the stops, employ all their skills for this fight. Cousin versus cousin, winner takes all. So, and and believe it or not, I actually like the fact that Paul does take a few hits. You know, he gets cut, he gets stabbed. He got stabbed twice. He got stabbed in the stomach and stabbed in the shoulder. So it shows that, he's powerful, but he's not invincible. He's still human. Like, yes, he has powers of prescience, but he can still bleed. And there was even a slight possibility that he could have died, but he didn't. He managed to get an edge in, and he got his enemy in close, got pulled the blade out of his stomach, jammed it in Fade, dropped him. And I do like the fact that the last words Fade said were the same words that he said to the guy he fought in the arena. You fought well, Atreides. So he's like, yeah, you killed me, but damn, you did a good job. And then dead. So then it basically leaves Shaddam with no cards to play. Sardaukar broken. He's a hostage. And then Irulan comes in and says, I will be your wife. Spare my father, and I will marry you. And then Paul makes Shaddam kneel and kiss his ring. And I like that scene. I like that. Just finally being able to say, you answer to me now. We could have done this differently. I could have married your daughter and we could have done this peacefully. But now you do it on my terms. And but there is one thing that really kind of surprised me about the change. I mean, I understand that it was kind of leading up to it because Chani's portrayal is different than in other versions, in that she's kind of a skeptic and that she's kind of resistant to the whole idea of Paul being the Messiah. And the fact that she's like legitimately surprised when Paul makes the decision to marry Irulan, even after he declared to her, "I will love you as long as I breathe," which I thought was a great line. But it did kind of surprise me because in all the other versions, Paul always makes it explicitly clear to Irulan about Irulan that all she is getting from this marriage is my name. I'm marrying her for political points. That's it. She's not having my kids. She's not sharing my bed. She has getting nothing from me except my name. That's all. You get everything else. As far as I'm concerned, you are my wife. You are the mother of my children. You are my companion, and I am with you for the long haul. And the fact that he never mentions that in this version is kind of surprising. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of another way to show kind of the rift between the two because he's having to become this. He's not a boy anymore. He's not just Paul Atreides. He's not just Muad'Dib the Fremen. He's Muad'Dib the Emperor, the leader. He has to think big picture now. And that kind of puts a significant wedge between, the life he has to live and the life he wanted to live. Which is why there's that scene where Chani walks out of the throne room. It's like it hurts Paul to know that she's leaving him, but at the same time, he knows, like he said, I will do what must be done. I need this marriage. I need this political angle. Uh, and then, of course, Gurney says the great houses have declared that they do not recognize your ascendancy to the throne. Stilgar asks him, what do we do now? And then Paul says the line, lead them to paradise. And then you see that great scene where you have all the Fremen legions boarding the transport ships. and Stilgar's just whipping them up into a frenzy. And you've got Jessica and Alia talking about what's going on, and and Jessica says, "Your brother attacks the great houses. The holy war begins." And we're just like, and anyone who's read, Dune Messiah and the later books are going, "Oh, this is gonna be bad." Because believe it or not, one of the things that makes like the later books good is that they put the first book into kind of an interesting new context. You the first time you read Dune, you're like, "Oh yay, he won!" And then after you've read the other books, you go, "Oh no, he won." Because in the later books, we learn about how over the span of the 12 years, it's 12 years of war between Dune and Dune Messiah, entire worlds are wiped out. Entire religions are extinguished. And I think according to the actual like official count, by the end of the jihad, when the Fremen return to Arrakis, over 60 billion people are dead. And by the time the jihad is over, every single government institution, the House of the Lands, Great Houses of the Landsraad, the Chom Mining Company, the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit, all of them answer to Paul. After 12 years of war and 60 billion dead, he becomes the single most powerful figure in the universe. And it's terrifying. Because, in the movie, there's that scene where Gurney and Paul are talking about, like, what's wrong with being a prophet? Use that. And he says, because all my visions lead to horror. And Gurney asks, because you lose control? And he knows, no, because I gain it. I mean, seriously, 60 billion people dead in your name. That's, that is something that, I mean, could you even possibly comprehend that? I mean, that is just a mind-blowing thought. And then one of the big deviations is that, the very last scene is Chani going off into the desert calling a sandworm by herself. It's like the entire population of Arrakis is following Paul except her. And that was one of the most striking scenes for me was just the idea that, the woman who loves Paul is the one person who is not following him. And this kind of reminded me of that scene. For anyone who's played Warcraft 3, you know the level I'm talking about, the Calling of Stratholme, where Arthas and Uther and Jaina see that the cult of the damned has managed to infest the grain supply of the city of Stratholme with their undead plague. So all of like the majority of the citizens of the city are infected, and they'll slowly become the undead. So Arthas says this entire city must be purged. Uther is like, "Are you out of your freaking mind? It's no way possible. You can't do that." And Arthas is just committed to this because it's like one of the most terrible things he can do, but it's what he must do for his people. And Uther, he dismisses Uther from service. He tells everyone, like, listen, unless you have the balls to do what I'm willing to do, get out. And they all leave. Well, most of them leave, except the units you start with. But the point is, Jaina walks away, and Arthas goes, Jaina? And Jaina goes, I'm sorry, Arthas. I can't watch you do this. And that I feel like is kind of what Cheney's doing. Is like, Paul, I love you, but where you're going, I can't follow. I can't be a part of this. Nothing good is going to come of this. So she returns to the desert. And people are going to say like, "Oh, this is a non-ending." Like, no, no, this is just the ending of a chapter. Because, as you know, the iconic line, the saga of Dune is far from over. And that's the case here. This is just another turning of a page in the great history of the universe. And it's the end of a chapter, the end of the old empire, the beginning of the jihad. This is an age of new wonders and new horrors, and where like anything is possible now, both the good and the bad. And so, I'm looking to see what's going to be happening in the new TV show, Dune: The Sisterhood, and I'm really looking forward to where they go with Dune 3. Whether it's going to be, if they're going to call it Dune Messiah or just Dune Part 3 or something. And I do look forward to seeing kind of the aftermath of the jihad. Like what will happen to Paul and Irulan and Cheney and all of the other characters? Like, how are Jessica and Alia going to deal with the aftermath and the fallout from their actions? And then of course, in Doom Messiah, you've got all these new characters, including, if you've read the books, the return of Duncan Idaho as a clone, a Gola, a Talaxu Gola. Now, of course, the question is, if they do bring back Duncan Idaho in the third one, are they going to have Jason Momoa play him, or are they going to have to cast somebody new? Because depending on when they start shooting and scheduling conflicts, Jason Momoa might not be available. It's entirely possible. I would like to see Jason Momoa return as Duncan Idaho, because it would be kind of cool to see how he interacts with the characters, dealing with, his own internal struggles of like being, a Gola, but also slowly regaining his memories and personality as Duncan Idaho. Because that's the special thing about Duncan Idaho in the books, is that he's probably one of the few Talaxu Golas who regains the memories of their former life. And in subsequent books, that makes him one of the central figures. And then in the expanded books, which purists don't consider canon, there is the idea that he is the Kwisatz Haderach, not Paul, of because every time he has died and been brought back, he's regained his memories. So you have this man who has died and been reborn multiple times across multiple centuries, and has been able to remember all of the events. So the idea of him being kind of the big player in subsequent stories does kind of add a kind of an interesting twist to the story. But yeah. So do I recommend Dune Part 2? Absolutely. If you loved Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2 is more of the same, a lot more of the same. And I think you'll love it. Cinematography is gorgeous. Like almost every scene in the movie could be a painting. It's just gorgeous to behold. The color palettes, the lighting, the use of practical and CGI effects is just phenomenal. Hans Zimmer once again knocks it out of the park. The man won an Academy Award for his score for part one, so if he wins a score for part two, it's going to be like, duh. And if he doesn't, it'll be a tragedy, because the man is a freaking genius. I've loved his work ever since Gladiator. Um, and just Denis Villeneuve took something that everyone thought was impossible, and not only did he make it impossible, he made it accessible, I think. I mean, Dune is still an incredibly complex story, but the way he adapted it and created it made it so that people who don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of the books will be able to get into it and not be overwhelmed. It's like how Peter Jackson did The Lord of the Rings, because Tolkien created this entirely like this huge world with mythology and language and customs and entire geological trees, family trees for some of the major characters, and all of this stuff. And Peter Jackson was somehow able to take all of that and make it into three movies, well, six if you count the Hobbit trilogy, and streamline it to enough that people who had never even read the books before would know who's who, what's its the stakes, the players, and all of the important events. And then, if they happen to read the books, their knowledge could then be expanded. Now, of course, certain things had to be adapted, like, for instance, Lord of the Rings has no Tom Bombadil, but at the same time, Tom Bombadil was kind of one of those characters where it's like, I mean, he's cool in the books, but would he really work well on screen? I don't know. But but yeah, there is that whole concept this of of Peter Jackson and Denis Villeneuve taking massive amounts of source material and adapting in a way that not only made it accessible but massively entertaining. So yeah, I've seen it twice. I might see it again. I don't know, but I am very, very happy that I did. It is, and I'm definitely looking forward to when it comes out on, DVD and Blu-ray because I would just love to see all of like the behind the scenes features and all the commentaries just to see how people kind of, the cast and the crew, how they handled it, how they perceived it, and what their thoughts and feelings were on the whole thing. Because, I mean, Dune isn't just a movie, it's an experience. And an experience that you should definitely partake in. So that's my 2 cents on the whole thing. And yeah. So if you get a chance to see this movie, definitely go see it. So this is Steven Jackson coming to you from Joint Base Lewis McChord here in Washington State with my thoughts on Dune Part 2. I'm sorry if the video ran a little bit long. As you can see, there is quite a lot to talk about. So I hope you enjoyed what I had to say and have a nice day. Oh, and long live the fighters.